Welcome to the World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph and GP of Flex Capital. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Sigal Mandelker. Sigal served as Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence from 2017 to 2019. She's currently at Ribbit Capital. Sigal, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thank you, Auren. It's amazing to be here.
I'm really excited to dive in. And one of the things I'm very interested in is sanctions. And you're one of the leaders on sanctions. We have a lot of examples of successful sanction regimes helping to avoid like some sort of bigger conflict. At the same time, there's these examples of these long-standing sanctions, like embargo on Cuba, for example, that don't really seem to have changed any behavior of the country. How do you make sanctions effective?
First and foremost, I'd say preparation, like anything else, right? So before you launch any particular set of sanctions, whether they're individualized targeted sanctions or broad country sanctions, you have to really be disciplined in doing the work to understand, set from the beginning, what are your objectives, right?
Yeah.
Which seems like a really obvious thing to say, but not all government decisions.
And just to cut in, so are sanctions better when they're relatively temporary? Like if you're like, oh, we're gonna if we have to sanction these guys for 30 years to achieve our objectives, like is that just like likely going to not work?
Well, it doesn't work that way. So they're actually for the most part not time limited.
But I mean, in your head, like, wouldn't you say, okay, if we achieve these objectives, we'll lift the sanction kind of thing?
Yeah, the objective is always, the biggest overarching goal of sanctions is to change behavior, right? So if in your mind, what you're thinking about is, okay, this set of sanctions will be in place until such time that we actually change behavior. Change behavior can mean a lot of different things. It could mean that you push a country to have free and fair elections. And by the way, sanctions have been used successfully,
like in South Africa or something like that, or
something like that. Sanctions can be used to limit the ability of a nation state actor to get access to the funding that they need to proliferate weapons of mass destruction, or get access to funding to engage in terrorism. Sanctions can be used to just cut off long-term bad actors from the U.S. financial system, because we don't want perpetrators of genocide to have anything to do with the U.S. financial system at any point. In fact, the likelihood that you're going to quote unquote change behavior is sort of irrelevant, because the heinous act, happened in the past. And so, in my view, those kinds of people, at the end of the day,
that's just like essentially a punishment. She did something, and we want to punish this. Like sending someone to jail or something like that. We don't think the jail is going to make them necessarily better, but it's a punishment, and it's maybe used as a deterrence for other people who might be thinking about something like that.
As a deterrent. The other thing that's really important for people to remember is what a sanction is. A sanction is like at their sort of most, in their simplest form, it's cutting people off from the U.S. financial system, right? Yep. So it's not necessarily cutting them off from being able to transact with other countries, so long as those countries aren't connected to the U.S. financial system. And they're all
because the U.S. financial system is so prevalent, it does increase the costs of transacting really with everybody. Probably, right?
Exactly. And then there are these things called secondary sanctions, or all kinds of different iterations of what you might do with a sanction. Also, if you are sanctioned and you had money at a financial institution that has that connectivity with the U.S., then your money will be blocked or frozen.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
For a period of time. The interesting thing, by the way, Auren, to know about sanctions is their history. So sanctions as we know them actually began in World War II. when on April 9 of 1940, Henry Morgenthau saw that Hitler had invaded Denmark and Norway, and he, without any executive authority to do so, he calls the head of the New York Fed and he says, you know, all those assets that you're holding for Denmark and Norway, I want you to freeze them, just freeze them. And he did. The head of the New York Fed did. Roosevelt signed like the first executive order as we know it. And during the course of the war, they were able to freeze $8 billion in 1940s money,
It was
which
a lot of money. Yeah.
150 billion today. Yeah. And so there, the sanctions didn't change Hitler's behavior, right? Terrible things happened. But I always like to say, imagine what could have happened, how much worse it could have been if he had gotten access
to that money. Yep. Interesting. Got it. And in that case, it's in some way, I think of that maybe less of a sanction and more of like a more of a way of just like, okay, we're not sure what's going to go on, so we're going to freeze some situation for some period of time until like the chips fall a little bit. You know, they weren't necessarily saying like whoever is the new Denmark government doesn't ever get access to this money. They're just saying, hey, there's some unknowns right now, so at least for now, let's make sure we figure out who the legitimate Denmark government is before we hand over the money.
That's right. Like if Hitler was no longer in control, right? If Putin is no longer in control of a particular region, and you have a democratic leader or what have you, then you would be able to ultimately give that money back, right? Or give access to the money back.
And then, you know, it used to be that sanctions were much more blunt, often like targeted against an entire country or something like that. If you think of like at least my understanding of like the sanctions against Cuba, and recently sanctions have gotten much more targeted all the way to like an individual person. Sometimes it's like even the person's cook or something because they're moving money around. Is that a good thing that we've gotten much more targeted?
So actually, they've been targeted for a long time, like in the narcotics area, among other things. Again, like what you want to do with a particular set of sanctions, as I said in the beginning, is you want to understand what your long-term objectives are. So it could be like, for example, in a particular country, if you're trying to push them towards some kind of a free and fair election, what you have to think about from the outset is what's going to motivate that change in behavior. Sometimes it's, a massive set of sanctions on the country. Other times it might be going after the elites, the money people who operate around a particular,
and trying to convince them to then convince somebody.
Yes, because they may, it may be more important for them to get access to their money or to allow their kids to travel abroad and get educated, et cetera, than to be beholden to the leader. And so,
and what are some examples where that worked?
Well, one example is the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, ultimately, with the DRC, they did have an election. Some people still dispute whether or not.
It doesn't seem like the freest place in the world. I wouldn't put it in the top 50% of free countries, right?
But nonetheless, it did push the leaders there to actually have an election, and resulted in the ouster of at the top of the party that had been in place for a very long time. Other times you have massive sanctions on a country and it doesn't result in a change of behavior. Sometimes it does, and then a year or two later the whole thing flips too. So we've seen some of that, like in Sudan, for example.
Okay, so with Russia's in the news with Ukraine, and there's a lot of sanctions against Russian assets, Russian companies, Russian individuals. How do you think? And then there's there are other restrictions. I'm not sure that there's many sticks. I'm not sure if there's what carrots there are right now with Russia. How would you use some of these financial tools and other tools to motivate or change Russian behavior?
So it's a great and extremely complicated question. I think that when we think about sanctions, we should never think about them in isolation, right? Some people think they're the panacea for the world's problems. We've seen from history that that's actually not the case. They're unlikely to be effective when you're talking about a change, in the behavior of a country. If you're just deploying sanctions without also using all kinds of other tools of government power, whether it's the military, whether it's massive diplomacy, whether it's like multilateral action. And so the most important thing to do when you're starting any particular campaign is to really understand what's the right combination of all of those tools that will get you to the end result. There's also a timing question, right? Like if you initiate major sanctions and the country has already, invaded, it might be too late, because there might be a point of no return for all kinds of psychological reason, economic, et cetera, domestic political.
And it does seem like most of the countries that are out there, Russia is more immune to sanctions than most of the larger countries. They've kind of de-dollarized a while ago. They get most of their money from oil, which they can sell through many different channels all over the place. They have a extremely strong relationship with China, which has gotten much stronger since the sanctions. And
going to Moscow, I think next week or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, there's so it seems like of all the big countries, let's say the top 20 countries, it may work the worst on Russia than everybody else. Yeah.
We'll have to see over time if that's the case. The problem with some of these countries is that the leaders care a lot less about how sanctions are hurting their people, as long as they're in power and able to use the wealth that's around them. And there are a lot of people in Russia who have amassed a tremendous amount of wealth, even though a lot of them are now getting cut off from the financial system. Maduro is another example, right? As long as he can keep the people around him happy and continue to get access to funding for himself, and then build other relationships, by the way, with Russia, with China. He's just
Iran.
Iran. Exactly. So that's what I mean when you have to really understand what your objectives are before you go in, and understand what is it that will actually change a country's or a particular leader's behavior. And as you suggested, you also need to have an off-ramp, right? Because what you want is a change in behavior, then you need to signal to the right people that if they're involved in changing the behavior, then at the end of the day, they may get sanctions lifted, right? There's a relief for them.
One of the things it seems like it's been used a lot as a punishment. So it's somewhat of a relatively easy tool to say, hey, if you do this thing, we're going to punish you. And the goal is to stop people from doing it in the first place. They'll telegraph it up front. They'll say, hey, if you do this thing, we're going to sanction you in this way. And then, of course, once the person does the thing, you kind of have no choice but to sanction them, even though at that point, maybe the sanctions don't really matter at that point, but you have to kind of try to deter behavior in the future from other actors. So it's just like, again, it seems like it's a lot of it's just like a sentence that you give somebody for doing something bad. Do you agree with that? Or
well, it just depends on the situation. Honestly, I mean, it's again, there's like multi objectives that you might want to achieve, including deterrence, like fentanyl, right? If there's a group of people who are involved in trafficking of fentanyl, and you want to figure out how to deter that behavior, how to stop it, how to freeze their money, how to signal. What you really, in part, what you really want to do is to say, look, with fentanyl, we're going to completely, if you're effective, we're going to find some way to completely limit or your ability to actually make money off of this thing. Go do something else.
Yeah.
Don't poison the American people with your drugs. So,
And how do you, I mean, I'm not as familiar with some of the things in fentanyl, but like, what would you be doing differently on something like that?
well, I would really target the networks, the biggest fentanyl networks,
Yeah.
number one,
Obviously,
right?
there's chemicals that are being produced in China. They're sending those chemicals to Mexico. Then it's maybe being combined into the drug and then moved into the United States. The Mexican cartels, I imagine, are very difficult to sanction.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Oh,
there's
we
probably a
have.
lot of Mexican financiers that maybe we could, but
Yeah.
it becomes hard with our relationship with
Yeah.
Mexico, a very important ally. Um, and then China, obviously, if we do anything there, then there's going to be retribution going the other way. So how do we deal with a thorny problem like that?
So what you want to do, number one, first of all, you have to appreciate that you want to have enough, you want to make sure before you launch a major campaign like that, that you have enough resources to make sure the campaign is effective. When I say resources, I just mean people, right?
Yeah.
Because OFAC only has a few hundred people and a couple hundred people. And those people
And
are
for people who don't know, what is OFAC?
Oh, OFAC is the Office of Foreign Asset Control. It is the sanctions arm, the agency one of the agencies I used to oversee that implements the U.S. sanctions program. So the question there is, if you want to, let's say you want to go after a cartel, a whole network coming from China to Mexico, importing to the U.S., you really want to understand and study that entire supply chain, right? And figure out spend the time, energy, and resources to understand how those networks are operating and at what point you can use a tool like a sanction in calibration with other tools to cut off that supply chain, cut off the ability of those people to get, to make money off of this trade. Ideally, you're working with other countries, including China, by the way, along the way. So ideally, those people are also being prosecuted.
Yep.
If you can do a joint action, we did joint actions. I actually went to Mexico. We did a massive joint action with Mexico. So it's not just the U.S. acting alone. There are, again, a lot of people along the way who are able to cut it off. In my opinion, actually, sometimes sanctions are used for symbolism, to send a symbolic message. We're going to go after, fentanyl by sanctioning people. So, and then there are sanctions that are imposed among, against a couple people along the way. That's many times
Theater. It's more for theater.
it's theater, and it's diverting really important resources to make a political point or get a headline, when those resources could, again, in a world of limited resources, those resources could be better spent somewhere else. So I was somebody who, with some exceptions, didn't want to use sanctions for symbolism because I had a finite amount of resources and a massive mandate, right? And if I'm pushed to use those resources on things that aren't going to be effective, I'm not using them on the things that
Basically, you want to get the best ROI for the resources that you have.
Yeah, there's that piece of it. And then there's a different piece, which is sometimes people think like, oh, we addressed a problem, we sanctioned them. And then they don't think creatively about the other tools of government that could actually be used to be impactful.
Now, from the where it seems like, okay, putting the sanctions on is one thing. There's a lot of work that goes into how you do it and where you do and exactly what you sanction, who you sanction, et cetera. But that seems really just like inning one of the problem. Like the next stage is like actually figuring out compliance and then going after actors. Like that seems like much, much, much harder. Like walk us through how one thinks about that and how to make that better.
Well, so if you are imposing, let's say, a set of sanctions on an entire sector, right? And or you're imposing sanctions on an individual or a network that's very connected to the US financial system in some way, shape, or form. What you want to do, you also want to like really minimize the negative impact that might have on US companies, on the US economy,
Yep.
on,
So
certain
all the compliance things they
yeah,
have to do, all the
yeah,
other stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
And also on your allies and partners, there can be a lot of unintended consequences. So before you do something like that, you have to do a massive amount of work to understand what those different touch points could be, and how, when you actually launch the sanctions, you're going to immediately at the same time signal or give people the pathway to be able to continue to do the things that they need to do. So there's just a ton of work that goes into it in advance. Inevitably, again, if you're doing something massive, people are going to have an enormous amount of questions because they don't want to violate. So you impose massive sanctions against Venezuela, against PDVSA, against oil in Venezuela.
Yep.
To be prepared that that's going to be super complicated for a lot of different countries, as well as the companies, as well as the energy markets. So think about all the questions that you could answer by issuing FAQs on the day of the sanctions, or provide some kind of a relief. But then your phone is going to be ringing off the hook. And so you have to have the personnel in place to similarly be able to answer questions, provide relief, like issue guidance and licenses, et cetera, right, immediately in the immediate aftermath. I can't even begin to tell you how complicated it
Now,
is.
this is a data podcast. We're on World of DaaS. I imagine like there's a massive amount of data that's going through, and part of that is finding these like little needles in the haystack, because we live in a very, very complicated system, very porous, very easy to move things around. Essentially, sanctions are about money flows often, right? And so you can create you can front companies and move things and move different actors, or disguise different transactions, because often it will say you can't trade this type of good, but you could trade this other type of good, which is very similar to the first type of good, and they could like slightly alter it. So how does data come in? Where does it come in? How much should OFAC be investing in data? How do you think about data?
I thought a lot about data because we had a massive access to a massive amount of data, as you said, but we didn't always have the right tools to be able to effectively analyze that data quickly. And it's the government, right? So
Yeah.
things can work in all kinds of different, at all kinds of different rates and paces, and with sophistication. So one of the things that I did when I was at Treasury is I hired a chief data officer. I stood up a program management office for data in my front office, because what I wanted to do was to make sure that we were appropriately analyzing all the disparate pieces of the data that we had against, my four main components, alongside the rest of the interagency. And so I set up this office. We worked, I found an amazing person to run it. And then we worked with the help of a number of certain other agencies to really sophisticate the analytic tools, the kind of stuff that that comes naturally to you, but like the kind of analytic tools that we needed to be able to successfully ingest data, analyze data, build out the link charts that you need to be able to effectively target all of those different things that were involved.
Interesting.
In
And,
moving.
also one of your major initiatives when you're at Treasury was using the global Magnitsky Act to sanction individuals. How has that act changed the way we think about sanctions?
Well, so Global Magnitsky was focused on human rights violators.
Yeah.
So that's that particular program. It was originally called the Sergei Magnitsky Act, and that's focused on a particular, bad actors involving Russia. And then it was the Global Magnitsky Act itself was expanded to cover corrupt actors and human rights violators. And for me, it was very important that we really use those sets of tools effectively. And so what I did was I put a lot of resources to be able to actually use those tools in very effective and targeted ways to go after human rights violators, or corrupt actors all over the world, and also to target that, to make sure that they were targeted in a particular way that actually resulted in changes of behavior or freezing the assets of bad actors. And it was actually like in many respects a very successful program. Not successful in that we've cut off human rights violators all over the world, because there are just far too many of them, sadly and unfortunately. But we were able to use them in a lot of different sophisticated ways, and in many of those cases to achieve an important result. Others are still very much ongoing. It was for me personally a very important program to get off the ground. So I spent a lot of time.
Part of the reason that the U.S. sanctions have the power that they do is because the U.S. financial system and the U.S. dollar are really at the forefront of global trade. There is an argument that the more we use these tools, the more incentive we have for actors to do other types of move into other types of banking systems, to use other currencies, and therefore, in some ways, every time we use the tool, it becomes less powerful. How do you think about that argument?
Yeah, I actually worry about that quite a bit for a number of different reasons. Number one, the more you use them, the more you incentivize other countries to set up mechanisms to just completely avoid the dollar. You see, and it's happening, right? You see, China, for example, has been able to, has set up different mechanisms that are going to ultimately allow them to avoid the dollar, in my opinion, altogether, and to get more countries, they want to get more countries reliant on the yuan. Of course, that's going to depend on how strong, how much people want to put their assets in that currency, or at least do that for a period of time. The biggest challenge, I think, this is something I think the government needs to spend a lot more time on, is that one of the reasons sanctions have been effective, or when they are effective, it's because of what you said. It's the global reserve currency. It's used for trade. The other piece is because we have a global financial architecture, where you have a tremendous amount of connectivity today between different banks. So it relies
like SWIFT or something like we kind of control SWIFT, so we have a lot of power as to how these banks have to operate.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a misnomer around whether or not we control SWIFT, but yes, it's the system that's in place, right, that allows, or misunderstanding about SWIFT, but it's a system in place that enables all of this different connectivity. Of course, we're living in a world where people are rightly setting up alternative technological means to move money, because right now that system is just having nothing to do with national security or economic. It's just totally disjointed and in many respects inefficient. So we're seeing the advancement of different technologies that I think in the future and already today will allow people to much more effectively and efficiently move money without having to go through through what is in fact a very clunky system, to move their assets. And when that happens, if there's no connectivity, or if that innovation doesn't come out of the United States, for example, it instead is controlled, some of that architecture is controlled by countries like, China, et cetera. We're going to find it much more difficult, in my opinion, to be able to effectively use sanctions in targeted ways where it's really important to do so, right? If people aren't holding their assets in US banks, or there's no connectivity, then sanction is just totally irrelevant to those people.
Now, speaking of other types of digital types of currencies, you're also super involved and forefront leader in thinking about crypto. In a lot of ways, crypto is more transparent than the traditional financial system, given there's an immutable record on blockchain. In what areas do you think crypto can be better than the more dominant financial system?
Well, I think one of the ways to think about what's being built, whether it's crypto or other financial technologies, is to put it in a historical context. So most of the financial architecture that we have today was developed in the pre-internet world. It's sort of like mind-boggling to
Yeah, it
think.
takes a long time for something to clear. You have
Yeah,
ACH, which takes a
exactly.
while,
Right.
or,
So
it's the wire system is very hard to undo and, et cetera.
exactly. So while I can send an email to India instantly, right? Like we talk real time with
Yeah.
people all the time, whether it's on the phone or it's WhatsApp or whatever it is, an email. If I want to send them money, it's often a much, much more complicated process because these systems weren't built to live natively on the internet. That's one of the things that I think actually this like blockchain technology, crypto, whatever you want to call it, is being built for. It's that like internet of value that was apparently intentionally left off the table when they developed, in the 90s when they did all of this work on developing the
Yep. There's no
internet.
like TCP/IP for money,
Exactly.
essentially. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's a lot of what's being built today, which is super, super fascinating. And at the end of the day, I think can result in like really significant efficiencies in how our system of global commerce works.
But why is like something like a blockchain better? I mean, obviously, there's lots of ways of sending digital money, and obviously, China has all these different, kind of ways via Tencent or Alipay to send money as well, that don't have anything to do with blockchain.
Yeah.
What's
Well,
the blockchain advantage? Like in some ways, you would think it just slows everything down and makes it harder to do a lot of transactions. It's intentionally inefficient blockchain, right? Because you have to have all these different replications that happen. So why is that better?
I don't know that it's better. I think we're gonna, first of all, a lot of the things like Alipay, there's still dependencies on like banking architecture
Sure.
in the background. So like
Yeah.
while we think that we use Alipay and it feels, I mean, not Apple Pay, it feels
Yeah.
like really instant. Actually, there's a ton of stuff that's still going on with connectivity to our different bank accounts behind the scenes. So we have to remember that because it's really easy to forget that we're still in so many ways relying on that particular architecture. The question, what you ask is an amazing question, right? Like, will it be blockchain technology, or will it be some other technology that at the end of the day builds in all of these different kinds of efficiencies? And by the way, we're focused on crypto, but also just on disruptive financial technologies writ large. And I think we'll have to wait and see which of these different kinds of architectures of moving money will, at the end of the day, win the day. And by the way, there's a ton of different kinds of projects in blockchain, in crypto. There are various layer ones, layer twos, et cetera. So I don't personally know what's going to win, in 10 years. What I do know is that there's an amazing amount of talent that's going into building these fundamentally different architectures, software developers, coders, computer scientists, the 16-year-old coder to the person who's got a PhD from Stanford or Yale. And they believe that there's something that these are things that they're building that will ultimately be much more successful in curing some of the latencies that we have in our current system. And that's really exciting and fascinating to see, to be a part of, to watch, and to play some kind of a role in how that evolves over time.
We had Congressman Jim Himes on the podcast a few months ago, and he made a case for a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. What are your kind of thoughts on whether we should kind of do something like that?
So I'm not a big believer right now in central bank digital currencies. I tend to think that private sector, that we should be relying on our private sector to build. As somebody who spent a lot of my time in the public sector, I tend to believe that we should be relying on the private sector to build these, this kind of architecture. So stable coins, for example, we have great American companies that are building out the architecture for stable coins. The worry I have and we'll see what happens, but one of the worries I have with the CBDC is that it will inevitably give the US government or the Fed a tremendous amount of insight into how we're spending our money, where we're spending it, what we're doing with it. That's, by the way, why one of the reasons China is the first in the world really to have a CBDC, because at the beginning and the end of the day, China is a surveillance state. They,
Yeah.
people go to China, they know, you're going to watch everything that I do, and there are going to be all kinds of ways in which they're going to use the government to impose capital controls, et cetera. That's not what I believe our values are here as a country. I don't think that the government should be, although the Fed, there's a tremendous amount of work that regulators, the Fed, et cetera, put into monetary policy, et cetera. The question is, do we want the architecture of how our money moves to be massively controlled by the Fed, or do we want them to put rules and regulations on top of that system, but allow that architecture to be built by private industry? And then, as appropriate, the federal government, when there's illicit finance or what have you, gets insights and access to information using legal process. But I worry.
But your worry is really you're talking about the individual. They shouldn't know the information about Auren Hoffman let's say, without a warrant. Obviously, they already do a ton of stuff about learning about society, like they do surveys and they get data from banks and credit card transactions, and they do obviously the census. This is spends billions of dollars to try to learn some of these kind of financial behaviors, but that is somewhat on an individual, but they try to protect it. You're really about okay, they shouldn't dive into a specific person.
Not a person or a company, frankly. Again, they get lots of information through taxes. Like you said, there's all kinds of ways, census, whatever it is, there are all kinds of ways that the government does get access, or through legal process. But what I don't think is healthy for our country or democracy is for the government to be able to get full access over, all of the ways in which we spend money.
Basically, if they had if they saw someone's full GL or something like that, that would be, or a company's full expenses or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's not our country, right? That's not what freedom and democracy is all about. Government is there for important but limited purposes.
What else makes you excited? What else makes you excited about crypto?
Look, I think that the talent that's one of the things that I'm most excited about crypto is just the talent that's going into building these fundamentally new systems, and this sort of, how do we move value, or how do we think about commerce, et cetera, in the post-internet world. Personally, one of the things that I sort of am really interested in, just from my background, is how we can change things like anti-money laundering, like how we do anti-money laundering, right? Or how we collect and disseminate information about people. So if you think about KYC, know your customer, rules today, in any given month, we are, for a variety of different reasons, transmitting a massive amount of data to different companies. I wanted to go to a concert, sign up, not even to go to the concert. I wanted to sign up to be able to get on the list of possibly being able to go to a music festival, right?
Yeah.
In order to even sign up or be there, to be able to at 1 o'clock press the button, trying desperately to get the ticket, I had to give some app that I have no relationship with my name and
Social security number and stuff. And that's because they're worried about scalpers or something, and so they okay.
It didn't fix the problem with scalpers. I mean,
right.
At 1 o'clock I couldn't get a ticket because StubHub, whoever was, bought the aggregators bought them all up. But nonetheless, or they want to know that I'm over 18 or 21 or whatever it is, right? In any given day, you go to a liquor store, you show them your driver's license. There are lots of different ways that people even just there capture that information. I mean, your data, so know this better than I do, right? There's so many different ways that our data. So one of the things that's really fascinating in crypto that's being developed is a technology around zero knowledge proofs, which in my terms, because I'm not
Yeah,
I'm
so
not
you
an
basically just give
engineer.
people a string and then they know that you're over, they can prove
Yeah.
you are who you are essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Without me actually even having to give them my birthday. Like, why
Yeah,
do they need to know my birthday
totally.
if the rule is that I'm over 21? They just need to
Yeah.
know some proof that I'm over
Yep.
21. And so I actually think that something like that, using zero knowledge proofs or something else, can really actually revolutionize how we do anti-money laundering, how we protect our data, how we like keep, these honeypots, think about the massive hacks that happen on a daily basis. A lot of those, a lot of those hackers are just getting in, access to a massive amount of data because we're sending it to all kinds of different companies, on a second by second basis. So is there some way to like completely change how we do that, still achieve and maybe better achieve our anti-money laundering goals, because there are all kinds of other sophisticated ways to do that without creating all these honeypots of data all over? I mean, I'm sort of curious what you think about that, because you're in the data. Yeah, you're like in the data business.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's a very, very hard question that I think we're all going to have to grapple with. Now, you've also been very vocal about the need for smarter regulatory frameworks to kind of address the risks associated with crypto. But you can go in with a blunt hammer, you can go in a little bit more with the scalpel. Like, what would your ideal regulatory system look like? It seems like right now we have kind of the worst of all worlds because we have all these different agencies fighting for who's the regulator. There's all this uncertainty. It's not even clear what you should do or what you shouldn't do. The rules keep changing. It seems like every month the rules keep changing. So it seems like almost anything is better than today. Like, how would you do it differently?
So I would do it actually similarly to what we did. So one of the agencies I oversaw was FinCEN. 2013, FinCEN, I believe, was the first government agency in the world to say, hey, there's this thing called crypto. People are moving money or able to move value transfer through crypto. That looks an awful lot to us like, and this is before I was there,
Yeah.
to called money transmission. When there's money transmission, there are a set of rules that apply to companies that are involved in money transmissions. They have to have they have to have chief compliance officers, financial.
Yeah.
So the
So you're
idea
talking about
was
like a Western Union type of thing, or
like similar,
yeah,
exactly, to Western Union. So the idea was, let's not like let's provide these companies with certainty, incentivize them to actually build out financial crimes units so that they can do the same kinds of things that traditional institutions do, which is look for suspicious activity, report it, et cetera, when it happens, but really build their own mechanisms to make sure that they're not the transmitters of that bad, of money involving child exploitation or narcotics trafficking or weapons proliferation, et cetera. So they did that in 2013, and then over a period of years, they would go in and examine different exchanges and work with those exchanges to like make sure they had the compliance functions that they needed to then ultimately be able to work really closely with law enforcement to like shut out bad activity while allowing the innovation to grow. I came in 2017, and the thing that I saw was that there are only 3 countries in the world who had similar rules to us along those lines, and which is like an amazing avenue for arbitrage, right? So
yep,
I said, look, we got to get the rest of the world to do, on the anti-money laundering side, to do the same kinds of things that
makes
we were
sense.
doing.
Yeah,
So we had a massive push globally to make that happen. Ultimately, actually has been very successful. I mean, different countries are still passing laws, but et cetera. There's some places where I think things have gone wrong, but nonetheless, the idea was, let's make it so that bad actors understand that if they try to use crypto to move money, they're going to get caught, they're going to get arrested. Let's shut them out of that system while allowing the innovation to grow. The other thing that we did was we put out a tremendous amount of guidance. So in 2019, we put out this big document, like telling people, hey, if your business model is X, you have to follow these rules. If your business model is Y, this is a set of rules, or these rules don't apply to you. Come in, ask us questions. We want to work with you. That was, in my opinion, really important to do. And then we talked to the private sector all of the time, right? They came
yeah.
in, talked to us about what they were happening. Law enforcement built relationships with these companies, et cetera. So I actually think that could happen very easily if there was a will, along other, in connection with other important objectives like investor protection, right? Like when it comes to, there's this like war going on over whether or not a particular token or digital asset or is a commodity over or a security,
Right.
and a
It's
commodity.
crazy. Yes.
It's crazy,
Yeah.
right? All companies want to know is what are the rules and
Yeah.
what do we need to do
Totally.
to follow them. That is it. And when you think about, like, from a securities
And
perspective,
is it, at least from my perspective, it seems like that war is happening really because it's a turf battle. It's like the different regulatory bodies in the US want to, there's a lot of
yeah,
credibility and credit if they get to regulate crypto. And so they're fighting each other, get to see who does
yeah.
it rather
Which,
than like what's best for the country.
which, by the way, like that happens in government all the time. I
Yeah.
can't
Okay. Of course. Yeah.
get to tell you like how many times turf battles get in the way of good government, right? So, but at the beginning and end of the day, when it comes to like how do you protect investors? You disclose, number
Yeah.
one, right? And then you prevent fraud and manipulation. All of that is eminently doable in this system, right? If you said, look, if you want to issue a token and make money off of it, et cetera, we just want to make sure that the people who are investing their money in that particular token know what the risks are, just
Yep.
like they would otherwise. And then we want to protect against fraud and manipulation. Well, the amazing thing about crypto is that you can actually do that in a really interesting and successful way because there's so much transparency in the system. We should be focusing our effort on, again, like telling people what the rules are, what they need to do, and then like having the tools in place to make sure it's not, misused, abused. We don't have
I think
tons
one of the
of
things with crypto, as opposed to some of these other things, is just it is pretty complicated. And for if you just think of like staking, where you're essentially earning interest in a cryptocurrency, right? So let's say you have Solana and you're getting 4% yield of a Solana tokens on your Solana token. Well, that's a weird thing because it's not dollars. And so, you have all these, so you can have one side saying, well, you should pay tax on that. And the other side, well, maybe you should only pay tax when you sell it because like, we don't even know what it's worth. Right. And you don't want to force sellers to have to, to cover the tax bill and stuff like that. And maybe they're both good arguments, but I think it's very hard for people to even understand what is happening there. And so
because
there's like a strong education thing that has to happen first.
well, there are a couple things that need to happen. Number one, in order to make smart rules about the tech, about this particular set of problems, people in the government have to understand what the hell this is.
Yeah.
And there are massive restrictions today in the government that are like ethical restrictions that completely block the ability of the people who have to make the decisions to actually interact with the technology. It's crazy if you think about it.
Wait, sorry. What do you mean that there's
You can't,
systems?
if you are in any kind of a policy role overseeing crypto, you can't actually go online and see what Solana is. You can't you can't send Bitcoin. You can't have Bitcoin. You can't do
Well,
any.
sorry, I thought you can't have more than a certain amount of Bitcoin. Like, can't have, you have to have, if you have over $1,000, but you're saying you can't have $20 worth of Bitcoin?
The rules are like massively onerous. That's right. So if you have if you had a,
Okay, so that completely, because anyone who knows anything about crypto has some crypto.
yes,
It'd be
exactly.
pretty
That's
rare
exactly
to
the
know a
point.
lot about crypto without having any crypto at all, right?
You're right, 100%. That's exactly right. So you cannot, people in the government today who are making policy regulatory decisions about crypto cannot own it, access
Well, how
it.
does that work? I mean, almost everyone who makes policy decisions around stocks at least has owned stocks and probably currently owns stocks. So why is one different than the other?
Great question.
Okay.
I don't have an answer for you. I have is this like a massive problem, which is that the people who are making the rules, all of the rules, right?
Yep.
Not, that's why you're leaving, like people who actually are really interested in crypto are leaving the government en masse because they're like, I'm really interested in this. I think this is a revolutionary technology. I think this could change the world. I want to be able to interact with it. And yet in this space, I have to like basically operate with a blindfold, you know.
And by the way, even if you don't like it, you should be you might want to see what's going on so you
Point.
could stop it or
Exactly.
something. Even if you were anti-crypto, you
Exactly.
probably want to be like
Exactly.
checking it out or
Exactly.
something like that,
That's
right?
right. Now, what do they get access to? They get access to blockchain analytic tools
Of course.
if
Yeah.
they have funding, right? But that's intended to help you detect illicit activity. That's
Yeah.
not intended to help you see how Solana works or
Yeah.
Aave, whatever, Uniswap or whatever it is, or NFTs, by the way, right? So that's like a particular important lens, but it's just one lens. The other thing you get access to are
It's very funny because imagine like you're not allowed to buy baseball cards for your kids or something, right? Because
exactly.
which is essentially what an NFT is, the baseball card. So
It's a
it's like,
base.
oh no, you can't. If you bought that Topps pack for your kids, now all of a sudden you are you're no longer allowed to be in the in the Treasury Department or
That's
something.
what it is. I heard somebody say, like, you know what? I wanted to take my kid to some kind of a sports game, but I had to buy an NFT and I got nervous. It didn't take them.
Oh my gosh,
Crazy it is.
hilarious.
And so just like as somebody who's been, all worked all over the federal government and all three branches of government, to think that people are being forced to make rules without actually being able to like interact with the technology, it's terrible. So where are they getting the information? I said blockchain analytic tools, which are important. I mean, I'm an
Yeah,
advisor and investors in one of those,
and
which
Chainalysis, right? Which is a great
analysis.
one. Yeah,
It's a great company. And then headlines are, articles that are intended to get information, a lot of attention because they have clickbait headlines. So much of what they're getting is just like the massively negative news. Some of that negative news is really important to know and understand, but they're not paying nearly enough attention necessarily in understanding the positive developments, because the best way to do that is to actually interact with the technology. Or as you said, you could interact with it and think it's crazy, whatever it is, like
yep,
at least interact with it so you fundamentally understand what's being built. The other thing is that, like, so imagine you're in the government today and you want to have access to crypto. You believe in the tech, you want to use it to send money home to Argentina or
yeah,
wherever it is. What you have to agree to do is to then not have a policy role in the space. So this is why there's like this huge both brain drain from the government and people who have who understand the tech, and also why it's become really difficult to recruit people who enjoy who understand and appreciate the tech to come in, because they know that if they're going to have a meaningful role, the second they walk in the door, they have to put a blindfold.
yep,
And this tech is changing at the speed of light, right?
right.
So like you miss something, like the whole world has changed. It's just like extraordinarily, like lots of things, impractical. And in my opinion, could result in the US like massively disadvantaging itself globally in this space. It's happening every day. We're starting to look to the Europeans to tell us what the rules should be. We've never, as I said, like in the AML space, we were the leaders,
Yeah, yeah.
well, because we were the best at doing that. When we're starting to look to other countries to tell us how to regulate, that's like sort of anti-American, right? Like that's
Now, a
not.
couple personal questions. I know you're a child of Holocaust survivors. What lessons did you learn from your parents?
So, thank you for that question. I mean, I have always lived with this, understanding of what on the one hand, what my family lost, which is, probably 95% of my family was probably killed, something like 93 of
Yeah,
my grandparents, et cetera, were killed in the Holocaust or as a result of the Holocaust. So that just comes with a very deep and heavy history to understand that I'm here, but for the grace of God, right?
yeah.
Or not God, but for the grace of life, a bunch of miracles. And so that just kind of inherently instills in you, or instilled in me, this desire to do things to at the end of the day, you know, show the world that, yes, this might have happened to my family, but we've been able to, overcome that and actually like achieve important things. When I was had my Senate confirmation hearing, I talked about my family history, and my dad was sitting behind me. My mom had passed away already, and a bunch of the senators commented that as I was talking about him, he had tears in his eyes.
Oh, wow.
And it was a very moving moment to know that, like, yes, this happened to my family 80 years ago, but by a belief in, hard work. My parents also came here in the late 60s to, ultimately to pursue the American dream. Um, so just understanding what's important in life, where we, always operating with this maybe heavy responsibility in some respects for my family, but also this massive desire to make the world, in a one small way, like a better place. I've done a lot of human rights work throughout my government service, to make sure to at least try to do my own little part, and preventing bad things from happening elsewhere has also always driven, my public service, and now even what I'm doing now. So
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay, last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Go to grad school, law school, because it's a good degree to have, and it'll help you network. Like,
Give you options,
give
essentially.
you options. Yeah. Only I always say, like, people come to me to say, like, should I go to law school because I want to do other things in life? I'm like, well, do you want to be a lawyer? That's what I always say.
Yeah.
If you want to be a lawyer and you know why, go to law school.
Yeah.
But don't incur a massive amount of debt if you don't actually want to be a lawyer, right? So, like, really calibrate your decisions in life according to, like, what you actually want to do and accomplish and achieve, and not just because it's a pathway or,
Yeah, it does seem
people.
like for a lot of ambitious people in the past, they went to law school because they didn't really know what they wanted to do. So they're like, okay, well, I generally, find it intellectually interesting. So and I had a political science
Yeah,
degree, so I'll go to
yeah,
law school.
exactly.
And today it seems more that same person is going to business school, but kind of for the same reason. It's like, well, I don't really know what I want to do, so I'll go to business school.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Except I tell people, like, I tend towards giving people more advice to go to business school than law school, unless they want to be a lawyer, because it's
yeah,
less money. It's 2 years, you build amazing networks. There are a lot of things that business
probably
school
more
might not.
parties or something in
Yeah.
business school. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't, yeah, you would know that probably better than me, but
I
yeah.
don't.
Oh, you don't,
I
you
never
don't.
went to graduate school
And,
myself.
and
Yeah,
look at
yeah,
you,
yeah,
Lauren
yeah.
Hoffman. You're like,
Almost didn't graduate undergrad either. Um,
amazing. Those are the most successful people.
all right. Well, thank you, Sigal Mandelker, for joining us at World of DaaS podcast. This has been awesome and really interesting. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really fun. Thanks for having me.